Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us. Welcome to today's lunchtime webinar titled Who Am I After the Relationship Breakdown? My name is Aisling and I am the online content coordinator here at Relationships Australia WA. This webinar has been brought to you from our West Leederville office in Western Australia. We would like to begin by acknowledging the Noongar people as the original custodians of the land on which we are presenting today, and pay our respects to their elders, past, present and future. I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. Today we have Gail and Mariyon here to discuss and explore the relationship breakup journey and the roller coaster of emotions it can bring. They'll also be sharing their favourite tips and strategies to help you rebuild your confidence. Please note the information discussed in this webinar is general in nature and does not take into account specific personal situations or circumstances you may be currently experiencing. You should consider whether the information is appropriate for your needs and, where appropriate, seek professional advice. If you or someone you know is experiencing a crisis situation, please contact Lifeline on 13 11 14 or emergency services on 000. We hope you enjoyed today's webinar and can take away some useful tips and actions as we all navigate these challenging times. Please post any questions that you may have into your chat box and Gail and Mariyon will do their best to answer them. I'm now going to hand over to your facilitators, Gail and Mariyon. We hope you enjoy today's lunchtime webinar.
Thank you, Aisling. Thank you so much. Welcome, everybody. Hi, Mariyon.
Hello.
Well, hi, everyone, and welcome to all of our viewers today. It's so lovely to be part of another Relationships Australia webinar. My name is Gail, and I'm a relationship educator here at Relationships Australia. I've been with RA for about 5 years and really feel super privileged to work with adults who wish to learn ways to improve their relationships and to understand themselves better. Mariyon.
Hi, thanks, Gail. My name's Mariyon and I've been working here at Relationships Australia now for 10 years. So qualified as a facilitator, and also I'm a psychotherapist. And one of the things I've also progressed through in my journey, from starting out as a journalist and doing numerous other activities in my portfolio career, is this focus on language and how it is that we create ourselves in the way that we use language, and really understanding the dynamic of that as part of postgraduate studies in dispute resolution and how we argue and all of those interesting and fascinating things. So I'm looking forward to today's discussions with you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mariyon. I'm going to share the screen with you now so that you can see excuse me, let me just move that over. You can see what we're talking about. And before we start, I just wanted to tell you that we're going to be looking at this idea of who am I after my relationship breakup. And I'll be chatting to Mariyon about who you are during that time. And it will be a combination of information, some activities, and a little bit of personal reflection as well. And we're going to be using the chat function for that. So I'm going to walk you through how that works. Hopefully you can see on your screen now you have a slide. And if you haven't used Zoom a lot, the chat function is the way that we'll get to interact with you, because we can't see you and we can't hear you, unfortunately, even though we would love to be able to see your faces. If you come into our locations in Leederville or Mandurah or Bunbury, we do get to see you face to face, which is really a lovely experience for all of us. So with the chat function, you have a menu bar either at the bottom or the top, and it will apply if you have a computer, a laptop, a phone or an iPad, and there'll be a button for chat. If you can't see that button, there'll be 3 little dots and maybe it's hiding under there. So have a look at the chat function. If you have found it, can you please do me a favor and have a look at where it says to? And you'll see that there's a little drop down arrow and it gives you a choice of choosing everyone and specific people, maybe hosts and panelists. I'd like you to select everyone. And I would love for you to test out the little chat function and just maybe type in a hello, hi. Val says, good afternoon, everyone. It's a beautiful day. Hi, Kim. Sharon says hello. We've got Greg, hello. Yes, everyone is successfully using the chat. That's wonderful. Thank you so much. And it's so good to see that we have quite a lot of people on here today, Mariyon, which is really, really lovely. So what I would like to get started with is a question that seems straightforward enough. Why might people be so keen and so interested in rushing into another relationship straight away after they've left another one? And I think it's a really, really good question. I'd really love for us to explore that, Mariyon.
And I also realised as part of my introduction, I neglected to say the reason I'm sitting here today with you is because I run the Rebuilding After Divorce and Separation course, which I've been doing for many years now. So that's one of my areas of speciality here for Relationships Australia in the West Leederville office. So back to the question, why do we want to rush into another relationship? And, you know, this is a natural response to relationship breakdown. We are feeling rejected, we are feeling sad, we are feeling alone. We have this desire to connect. So David Schnark is a theorist that we use in our courses, and he talks about the theory of differentiation, which is essentially the idea that we have two drivers, and for all of us. So whether it was you, your former partner, your best friend, your mother, your father, we have these two drivers. One is to connect with somebody and one is to be autonomous. So when we have these two drivers, sometimes they feel a bit like they clash. And, you know, to be autonomous means making our own decisions, choosing how we spend our time, what sort of friends, how we spend our money. So that desire to be autonomous is part of being human, you might say, but also the desire to connect with somebody else. So to be in a relationship is a primary social driver for all of us. And in fact, Matthew Lieberman writes about the brain, what it's sort of observing when it's at rest, so-called at rest, is this idea of it's engaged with understanding all the social dynamics that we're existing within. So primarily our brain is wired to be social, is his ultimate thesis. In this idea that we want to be connected to somebody, we are also, I guess, moving away from our pain. We're packaging it, compartmentalizing it, and we want to say, you know, I'm okay, and I want to be loved again, and I want to be regarded. You know, one of the issues that occurs in a relationship is we spend a lot of time focused on the other. So this idea that they are mirroring back, or that they are taking a lot of our energy or focus. So we spend a lot of our time in a new relationship with our energy engaged on the other person. And so what we perhaps might need is to take the time to look inward and really understand for ourselves, you know, why we might be feeling how we're feeling. Even if we were the one to leave a relationship, we will go through these mixed tumult of emotions. The other thing that is important to understand is that we are also perhaps acting out in some predetermined way. And of course, a lot of us reject that. We don't want to feel like our feelings are the same as everybody else's. And when we study patterns in human relationships, the 3 attachment styles are very important to this desire to be in another relationship. So we're either going to be securely attached, or we're going to be anxiously attached, or we're going to be avoidantly attached. And essentially, secure people feel comfortable with intimacy and are usually warm and loving. Anxious people will crave intimacy and are often preoccupied with their relationships and tend to worry about their partner's ability to love them back. And avoidant people equate intimacy with a loss of independence and constantly try to minimize closeness. So as part of your attachment style, you are going to have a different view of intimacy and togetherness. You're going to have a different view on how you deal with conflict, your attitude towards sex, your ability to communicate your wishes and needs, and your expectations from your partner and the relationship. So when we're talking about this question, why we might want to move straight into a relationship after another one has ended, we will find that the anxiously attached person will be very keen to be back in a relationship. And they will, you know, one of the characteristics of anxious attachment style is to seek out the relationship and wonder what they can do to do that better. And according to, you know, Amir Levin and Rachel Heller in their Attached book, what they're talking about there is percentages of people, so that over 50% of us are securely attached, 20% are anxiously attached, and 25% are avoidantly attached, with the remaining 5% falling into a combination of both anxious and avoidant attachment, which, is conversely what happens. The anxiously attached people tend to match with an avoidantly attached person. So we're always in this struggle, in this dynamic. So we might, rephrase this question to say that generally, if we have more of this anxious attachment style, we might want to rush into another relationship. And let's be clear, this is not a gender-based allocation of attachment styles. So really understanding our own need to be in the relationship, that if we are focused on the other, we may be trying to avoid looking at some of the pain in ourselves. And in fact, when we think about the reasons that people might come to divorce recovery classes, Bruce Fisher, who has written extensively and run many of the divorce recovery classes in the US for many, many, many years, he's since passed away, but we use his resource. He mentions that people come to the divorce recovery class twice as often after the breakdown of the rebound relationship, after the long-term intimate relationship has ended. So people are not coming along after their long-term relationship has ended. They go immediately into another one or very soon afterwards. And then after that rebound relationship has finished, then they are coming along to a divorce recovery class. In fact, as Bruce Fisher says, twice as likely, twice as often as after the marriage relationship.
So I've got to say, Marion, I'm really interested by that statistic. So what you're actually saying is that rebound relationships are twice as likely for people to start reflecting and looking for help, looking for additional services, which is kind of a curious thought, isn't it? That there's more difficulty after, in fact, than before. Yeah, absolutely. That is food for thought, for sure. That is food for thought, which probably brings us on to talking about this idea of what's going on for those people that are experiencing that. And I'm thinking about this idea of loneliness and grieving. Do you want to talk about this a bit, Mariyon?
Let me just read a little bit from Bruce Fisher's book at the beginning to help explain that, because yes, it's very relevant. The chapter 1 starts, are you hurting? If you have recently ended a love relationship, you are. Those who appear not to hurt when their love relationship ends have either already worked through a lot of hurt or have yet to feel the pain. So go ahead, acknowledge that you're hurt. It's natural, expected, healthy, even okay to hurt. Pain is nature's way of telling us that something in us needs to be healed. So let's get on with the healing.
I really like that. I think that is really significant. It normalizes it, doesn't it? It normalizes the experience and helps people to understand that those feelings, whilst uncomfortable, really, really uncomfortable, are quite part of the process.
Yes. And this is the number one thing that people say who come along to the course, Gail. They're relieved that somebody like Bruce Fisher has put their experience into words, and that it isn't something that they're experiencing by themselves. So that's one of the huge benefits of, as you well know, doing our community education courses, that you get to engage with a whole group of people who seem to be at a similar life event to ourselves. So essentially with divorce, we are learning to deal with a crisis. A divorce is a crisis in people's lives. And when we look at the indicators of, the impact of stress, it's right up there in the top 5 of how people are coping with the rest of their lives or not coping. So when we come back to understanding loneliness and grieving, we are working through a grieving process when we step out of our long-term primary love relationship.
So let's take it. Sorry,
about those stages. Sorry, I just mentioned that briefly, which is denial, denial, shock, bargaining, anger, and then we might move gradually into acceptance. So those stages of grief are things that we do move through as a result of going through a divorce, and that may be, well, either the dumpee or the dumper going through those feelings. But in terms of acting out the loss, and we will do that in the rebound relationship as well, we might be confident that we've moved on, but again, it's about actually learning to accommodate what our own attachment style is. So whether we're anxious or avoidant or securely attached. So it is about that moment of processing the emotions in terms of whether we're confident we've moved on or not.
So I want to just pause there for a second, Mariyon. So Louis has written in, what if grief isn't present, but rather resentment? And that's a really, really good question. Thank you for that one. What I'd like to do with that one is just draw into the next question I had, and that is really for other participants to participate in answering this for Louis. And that is, perhaps everyone could give it a second and think about, what are some of the experiences of loneliness that you have experienced, and what are the other feelings that have gone with that? Because I think what Mariyon is saying is that the process of grief is a bit of a rocky one. It's not a smooth road at all. And we can go through the various stages, and we can even slip backwards, which is really important to go gently on ourselves around that. But let's get our viewers today to just jot into chat, bearing in mind the chat isn't private, so don't put things in there that you wouldn't want other people to see. But what are some of the feelings that you have experienced that sit alongside this lonely journey, this process that you're going through? So let's get some things into the chat and see what people think. This is reflecting on what you're saying, Mariyon. So Louis already said resentment.
So I think we've got that question on the next slide as well.
Yes. Yeah, we'll move on and just let people start thinking about the feelings that they've experienced. So the next slide we've got is, sorry, that's the question. You're right, Mariyon. I was a bit behind the 8 ball then.
Some of the feelings we have when we are lonely.
So we've got despair. Narelle has written despair. Do you want to talk about that, Mariyon? Some of these fundamental feelings.
So, the range of feelings we have in this loneliness are extreme. Despair, resentment, hopelessness, helplessness. We feel angry as well. I mean, it's all a tumult, the maelstrom of feelings that we have. We often feel quite bitter. Yeah.
We've got self-deprecation there. That's a big one. Yeah.
Well, it's this fundamental questioning of ourselves when we lose our long-term love relationship. So we are questioning so many things. And we are seeing our married friends who might not know how to talk to us, who have separated away because of their own level of discomfort. And, the odd thing is, the more that we keep these feelings tucked away and compartmentalized, the more they tend to linger and burst out. So when we are able to name them and work through a process of sharing them and acknowledging them, and then moving through strategies, mindfulness strategies, other things, Stephanie Darick talks about envisaging somebody in a boat who's causing you resentment and anger, and actually placing them in that boat so that they're not uncomfortable being there, but that you can actually visualize them moving away from you and eventually getting to the horizon and disappearing, as a way of releasing some of your negative focus on that person, so that rather than keeping on having them in your head and in your heart, that you actually move them out of your body and visualize them over in that boat so that they are leaving you. So when we have feelings of resentment, that's actually a very powerful visualization to work on. These are fundamental human needs to be connected to somebody. And so when we experience that loss, you just you really have to contextualize and understand the significance of the crisis for you and seek some support, whether it is in group learning processes like our community run ones or reading books. So the Bruce Fisher book is good for that. The Attached book helps us, but being with groups of people who have also experienced that. These are fundamental needs. When we talk about how the brain lights up from emotional pain, and it's a similar area to where we've experienced physical pain, emotional pain hurts. It's a basic human need that we're not able to be meeting for ourselves, and it hurts.
I think that's a good cue for me to move on, actually, Marion, because I think that this idea of being in pain and experiencing extraordinary difficulty, but also being prepared to actually ask ourselves the question, and there's quite a significant difference here, I'm thinking, between, on the one hand, being alone, but on the other hand, being lonely. And I kind of think they're two different things. Can we talk about that a little bit for our listeners today?
And it is an evocative term. Oh, I'm lonely, and I think it's becoming more and more a struggle for people in the day of modern technology, that they feel virtually connected to people but still feel very lonely. And understanding that our brain works with social connection, that we need others to be close to us, that we need to touch somebody, that we need to be touched, hugged, and that connection are all antidotes to the power of loneliness, which is often something that we fear. I think we need to be clear, though, that it's just not the province of people who have newly separated, because we are all lonely at different times. And it's part of the human state that we have to learn how to be alone. That's who we are as beings. We are separate from each other, and we seek that connection. So, understanding for yourself whether, in fact, you have truly been alone in terms of your transition between relationships and being in the family environment. So for many of us, living with our parents, going through that progress of finding a love relationship in our perhaps late teens, early 20s, perhaps moving in with somebody directly from our family home, means that actually we haven't had an opportunity to experience ourselves as someone who is fundamentally alone, and that we know our own state of being. And of course, this is impacted by our own family of origin dynamics, whether we had a very close-knit family or whether we were very far apart and we were told not to depend on each other. And again, at risk of harping on it, it's going to be influenced by our attachment style. So if we are more of an avoidant attachment style, what Stan Tatkin calls the island, islands are very far away from each other, and they require waves, which is the anxious attachment style, to crash over and bring them back into the social world. So someone who is an island attachment style is going to say things like, I'm okay by myself. I don't need anybody. I find it a real struggle to say I love you. I don't want too much closeness. So those people might have made somebody who's more of an anxious attachment style feel very lonely in the marriage. So for some people, the loneliness was more pronounced within the relationship than outside of the relationship, because we also have to think about what expectation we have, what idea we formed when we said, I'm going to marry this person. And if we assumed that we wouldn't be lonely when we were with this person, and our expectations have not been met, then yes, we've got despair, we've got resentment, we've got the anger that our expectations were not met. And those are the kinds of processes, emotional processes, to understand what we're going through, to be able to acknowledge those and process that before we move on to a new relationship. And this is, with loneliness and aloneness, that Bruce Fisher has reframed this in his Rebuilding book. and he calls it all oneness. And I really love that phrase, all oneness, because he's saying, you know, you are dependent on you. You know, it is kind of beholden to yourself to self-realize. And I will just come back to my earlier point, you know, that being alone might be very challenging for somebody who's moved directly from the family environment where, you know, they had parental figures, even if they weren't ideal parental figures. And we move straight into our first love relationship and then maybe another one quite quickly. And we never really experienced ourselves as an individual as part of that process. For those people, it's going to feel very, very lonely. And there is going to be a tendency to want to move on to the next relationship very quickly.
So Marion, I'm sort of feeling that we've got a slide here, which is how did you feel when you first separated from your partner? But I'm kind of feeling like we've explored that in talking about feelings. Is there anything else on this one? Because the next one I'm kind of excited to talk about, because this is talking about this idea of oneness and, you know, being on our own. Is there anything you want to add to that about our feelings when we first separated from our partner?
Mm-hmm. Well, certainly if people want to contribute to the chat on that, what are the feelings you had when you first separated from your partner? There might be some others for people apart from the feelings of loneliness and resentment.
Because this is something
safe and relieved, we're hearing here. And look, it's going to depend on whether we chose to leave or we were left. So what we talk about is the dumpee and the dumper.
Yeah.
So that perspective is going to influence how we felt. And we might have also been thinking about leaving for some time in the relationship. And we might have started to work through the separation process, emotionally separating from our partner. And of course, you know, the journey of physical separation happens too. You know, are people still intimate or not? And for some people who are withdrawing and they're no longer intimate, then they have had the opportunity to, I guess, regroup and find themselves more as an individual. You know, it's very distressing when those things change in the nature of the relationship. What I did want to say about this, Gail, and it's, I guess, a bit more challenging, is the idea that, in fact, we are unconsciously choosing our love relationship. Now, Harville Hendrix talks about this in the Imago theory, that we are seeking out some of the unknown parts of ourselves, or what we might call the hidden parts of ourselves. And these are the ideas of that somebody is perhaps more social and the other person is a bit more withdrawn. And so as part of this, we are attracted to the more social person. We want to learn from them, or we want to be with them. We want to experience some of their confidence in that social interaction. What Harville Hendrix is talking about is that, in fact, we may have tucked that aspect of our personality development to one side, and that's what we like about this person, that it's something we can't perhaps access within ourselves. And that in the journey of the relationship, we are learning to come to a balance, an equilibrium, so that we have learnt to take on more of those social connection qualities, and our partner perhaps has become a little bit more restrained or quieter in the dynamic between the couple, so that we unconsciously seek this out as part of our experiences growing up in our own family, and you know, that what we have received from our own parents, and also then how that informs our attachment style. So all of those combined factors. So this unconscious seeking for somebody is the dynamic that might be difficult for us to comprehend, as in how that ended up in the separation as well.
Could I ask a question, Marion, just quickly? I just want to reflect back on a question that was asked earlier by Narelle, and I'm imagining quite a few people might have this question, and that is there a good source for people to refer to actually start reading and learning about their attachment styles? Because you've spoken about it quite a bit, and I think it's probably useful to maybe point people in the right direction. Could you
Yeah,
Have a
absolutely. I
suggestion
put
there?
this book up earlier.
Yeah.
Oh, can people see this? I don't know with this webinar.
Maybe
Gail.
hold it up just a little bit higher. That's
It's
the
called
one.
Attached. So it's a reference that I use quite a lot, Dr. Amia Levine and Rachel Heller. And there are other resources out there too. I think certainly talking to people, there seems to be a lot of Instagram stuff about attachment styles now, and I'd warn you to do a little bit more research than just the Instagram version. Okay, so Attached: Are you anxious, avoidant, or secure? How the science of adult attachment can help you find and keep love. And it's really got some interesting stories about people that you can relate to, either the avoidant style or the anxious style. It also has a checklist about others' attachment style cheat sheet. So, for instance, the avoidant style sends mixed signals, values their independence greatly, devalues you or previous partners. The secure style might be reliable and consistent, makes decisions with you, and has a flexible view of relationships. The anxious style wants a lot of closeness in the relationship, expresses insecurities, worries about rejection, and unhappy when not in a relationship. So, those kinds of very quick understandings in those examples is good. And I just also wanted to mention that when we go through a divorce process, one of the big things that happens is this loss of hope. And I know from my own experience, which is now well over 20 years ago, and we were both overseas, living overseas. And so you don't have that experience of having a support network around you, and I came back to Australia and I reflected on the fact, there wasn't much social media. There wasn't really, much of all of those things that we take for granted, but that the experiences that I had with my husband were actually kind of gone to me, because nobody here had that experience of me with my husband living together. It was all overseas, and our overseas friends who had that experience. And we were living in a third country. So he was from Hungary and we were living in the US. And then, the friends and activities that we had there that were common to us and our shared history, poof, they were gone. Because I came back here and he went back to Europe. And so this sense that I had any history that I could hold on to was completely lost to me. And also this idea that you lose plans, future hopes for what you're planning together, those more intangible losses that we grieve can be just incredibly painful. And this was a choice that I made, because this was a person who was having an affair, if not multiple affairs. So there was certainly a lot of angst going on, even though I was making a proactive choice for myself.
Thanks, Mary. Thank you for sharing that. That's a fairly significant piece of information for our listeners today. And I think that it's important to understand, and I've seen quite a bit written in the comments now, that this process of getting over, if that's what you can call it, of grieving, and how that entangles itself with normal life, and how difficult that can be to differentiate. This is the thing that happened with this person, but then life carries on and other things happen to us, and life can become extremely complicated, and it can be very, very distressing. So it's good for us to take a moment now and be part of this process today with us together, and just reflect on what's actually happened and coming for us. So I want to ask a question, Mary, and I want to just I want to talk about dancing for a second. I'm just going to move this over here. Sorry, I've just got a bit of a blockage on my screen. Can everyone see that? I think I'm sharing my screen again. So I want to, like I said, talk about dancing. It takes two to tango. So I'm really curious. It's a really age-old saying, but what I'm curious about is how, when we think about this is how I was inside the relationship, but where does personal responsibility, and this is a tricky topic, but where does personal responsibility, thinking about all this unconscious and conscious sort of language we've had around the couple, I feel like a lot of what goes on after, when I'm trying to find myself again, is about who I am myself, and what my personal responsibility is to sort of step into that. and there's a lot of truth going on. But I also feel that gets mixed up with the idea of blame. Can we quickly talk about that for our listeners today? Because I think it's a really important leap that we make as individuals.
And yeah, combining this idea that we have unconsciously chosen somebody with a conscious choice of how we move forward can feel quite challenging for people. I definitely acknowledge that. And even though you seem to segue off into the dance floor there, Gail, and I must admit that I do recommend dancing classes for people in the post-recovery of a divorce. It is a good way to get some of our sensual needs met and also make new friends. But to move on to self-responsibility, and the natural tendency, of course, is to say, well, of course it was all them, didn't have much to do with me. And unfortunately, in a small percentage of cases, often when there's an undiagnosed mental health issue, that may be the case, that we went for years to couples counselling and we did try and work things through. The unconscious dynamic that exists in the relationship is what we need to come to terms with, though, if we are going to process what actually happened. So, the communication loop exists in all relationships, and we are in that way taking responsibility for our communication style and what goes on for us. And I can't remember where that quote was from one of the authors that I've been reading recently. We are as needy as our most unmet need. So if we go back to this connection and autonomy idea, if we want lots and lots of connection, that people might call clingy, and we want all this connection and we're not getting it, then that's going to be an increasingly needy need for us. And, our partner in response to that might be running out of the room because they're more of the avoidant attachment style. And so we have to learn to take responsibility for our own need in that moment. So yes, doing dancing classes, wanting touch, wanting connection is our need. So we need to understand how we take responsibility for those things. And so the unconscious dynamic is part of the kind of communication loop to recognize that we had in our particular relationship and why we got into conflicts, and what our perhaps non-verbal demands to request to somebody in our face sometimes, that we didn't take responsibility for what we were actually requesting. And all of this makes up what Bruce Fisher calls the leftovers. And that's all of the adaptation styles, and whether we were going through rebellion and other things that we were experiencing in our relationship dynamic. So those are the kinds of things that we might learn to take some responsibility for. So we need to honestly ask ourselves, what did we contribute to the breakdown of the relationship? Which is a hard question.
It is a really hard question. And I think probably that's one of the toughest ones, and can also be part of the grief process. So thank you for that, Mariyon. I'm wanting to bring ourselves now to, we're almost at the end of the webinar. Sadly, time just flies. It just goes so very, very quickly. I'm thinking what I'd like to talk about now is perhaps we can understand this notion of our own individual worth, and what is it that defines us, helps us to understand what is it in me that's of value, because there's a lot, when I'm outside of the relationship. So finally seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. Can you talk a little bit about that, Mariyon?
So we might be at that point where we're acknowledging it wasn't a great relationship, and we are still struggling with things like, many people come to the course, the 8-week course, with, my partner had an affair, what's wrong with me? And understanding that people are going through psychological development stages that they didn't achieve when they were earlier in their life, because they never kind of separated from their family of origin, can help us feel less pain at the affair. It doesn't change the fact of the affair. It doesn't change the grief that we feel when we know that our partner has loved somebody else and lied to us. Okay, but part of this process then is to understand that there were, I guess, reasons a bit outside of your control. There was only so much that your self-will could do to change the relationship. That was one of the realizations I had in the separation, when I finally went, it's all me working on this. I'm really choosing to learn more about why people have affairs. What's the attraction? Why do you betray? Why do you lie? All of these things. And at some point, the other person wasn't, contributing and understanding or developing themselves. But this is the structure here that we see on the screen about self-worth, which is the fundamental given that we have value just as we are. And it feels like sometimes our self-worth and our self-esteem get battered in the process of a separation. And it is a life crisis. There is no, this is not a minor thing. It's totally understandable. But Gail, you certainly are the expert in self-worth from running our courses here at Relationships Australia. Did you want to say a bit more about the interjunction of those three?
I think so, Marion. I think, this is a passion project of mine. This is something I really think adds a lot of value to people's lives, to understand what this is about. And on the one hand, we have who I am, like my human beingness and my worth. And that can take a real beating to not actually believe in yourself, to judge yourself really harshly. And that can be hard, but it's also an understanding that I am actually worthy regardless. I was born worthy and I've earned my spot on this planet. But then we look at self-esteem, and I guess you can think of self-esteem as the stuff that happens to us, that comes to us from the outside world. We have no control over it. The relationship ended. We have, some control, but maybe there's lots of things we didn't have control over. And then on the other side, we have the way that we treat ourselves, which is the other part of it, the part of how I can treat myself better. And so if you think of it, I'm on this rocky road, and I know that I think it was Louis again who made a comment before about the grief and trying to interweave that into life and understand it. Well, yes, self-esteem's like this. Some days are good, some days are bad, and it beats us around. But our self-worth is still inherently solid if we choose that. But the thing that tempers that is self-compassion. Self-compassion enables us to treat ourselves like a good friend. So if you can do nothing else, treat yourself like a good friend and learn the skills that come with treating yourself like a good friend. And that's a powerful combination. Traveling the rocky road with an attitude of, I deserve this. I can be good to myself. I can be kind to myself. I'm human. I make mistakes. And I think that for me is critical in understanding who am I in recovering in this process. Yeah.
And look, there's another useful tool. Thanks for that, Gail. It's really clear. The other useful tool is the Bruce Fisher rebuilding mountain he talks about, to work our way through the steps. If we see on the next slide, that he has put this book together and this theory together based on thousands of people going through the breakdown of relationship. So he talks us through these levels of rebuilding blocks: denial, fear, grief, adaptation, which is some of the things I've been talking about, our unconscious patterns, why we might be rebelling unconsciously against some authority in our life. And then the person becomes the conduit for that we're in the relationship with, that we rebel against them by having the affair or doing something. So this is one of the great tools that we use in the course. Also, for some people, personal therapy may help us resolve issues. And certainly in terms of feeling okay about ourselves and our self-worth, as Gail was talking about, the worst thing to do is to enter into another relationship. Because again, as I said at the beginning, we're spending all that time focused on the other. We're not taking the time to understand what we're going through in our own life cycle and developmental processes. So I've mentioned a few bits here about the course. So let me just wrap up about why it's beneficial to come along to the 8-week rebuilding after separation or divorce course. You know, I've been privileged to spend time with people working through one of the toughest things in their lives, which is relationship breakdown. And this is one course, and I've delivered many, many, many different courses here at RA, and you see the arc of improvement that people go through. It's stunning. So we get to unpeel the layers a bit, and you get the opportunity to spend 8 weeks looking at yourself, your motivations in terms of love, why you chose the relationship you did, and maybe to learn to do it differently next time, because the statistics for second and third marriages are pretty much worse than the first round. We also have another course, Seeking and Keeping Your Next Relationship, which is an 8-week course as well. And that we are encouraging people to go and do after they've done the rebuilding course, not before. So that's really for single people who are looking for their next relationship and trying to do things differently. And there are some other courses there. Gail, did you want to talk about those?
Oh, just very quickly, you can see them on your screen. I've shared them with you. We have a number of courses running next term and into next year, but mostly these are the ones that are on. I'm just looking over to my screen right now. So we have a variety of different courses that will support you during this time, and they're both about yourself, and some of them are also about if you have children. And I would say that probably one of the biggest building blocks that sits underneath any relationship breakdown is really feeling better about yourself. So, and understanding all the strong emotions. So self-worth, the 8-week course is definitely worth a look in. That starts next term. And also if you're experiencing a lot of anger, which I think you probably have gone through because it's such a normal experience. We have 2 anger management courses running next term as well. So jump onto our website. I think Aisling is up next to say farewell to you all. So just before we leave, and she will just tell you our website in case you don't know that already. But thank you everybody for today. Thank you, Mariyon. You've been super informative, like amazingly so. And I really enjoyed listening and learning, because this is stuff I don't know a lot about. It's not one of my topics. So thank you so very much. Goodbye, everybody. Thank you for your contributions in the chat, and we'll see you on the next webinar, perhaps. Thanks so much.
Yes, and I thank you, Gail, and the team for being such a good support. It's a bit more complex doing a webinar because this is my first, and I'd certainly encourage people to come along to the courses. The face-to-face interaction is very valuable, and you know, look, the intensity of emotional responses that we've seen in your contributions, you know, this is a significant life event, and you know, we need support. So you know, reach out and grab it. We've really got some great resources here, and we'd love to see you. So thank you all for coming along.
Thank you, Gail and Mariyon.
Thank you, everybody. Take care. Bye.
Yeah, thank you once again. It was a real privilege to listen to you share your wisdom and your insight and your knowledge with us all here today. So, and I also want to say thank you to all of you who have joined us on today's webinar. We hope you found the information useful, and we'll also be sending you a recording of the webinar if you registered. So as Gail mentioned, here at Relationships Australia WA, we run a number of education courses and also many other services on a variety of topics around relationships and counselling. These services are available across WA as well as online, so please take a look at our website for more information on what is available in your area. You can visit our website at www.relationshipswa.org.au, our Facebook page at Relationships WA, or call us on 1300 364 277 to find out more about the services on how we can support you. It's been a real privilege to host this webinar today. Thank you once again, and we hope to see you at our next lunchtime webinar.